Hello and welcome. I am Anna and this is a new episode of Project Co, the podcast channel of Efecto Colibrí. A channel inspired by words that start with co, community, consciousness, co-creation, co-evolution, and of course, colibrí, which in Spanish means hummingbird. We have honest conversations with changemakers to explore mindsets and initiatives for positive change. The stories we tell and the stories we listen to have the power to regenerate our perception of ourselves and others. Stories regenerate. This is why at Efecto Colibrí we produce and distribute podcast content to inspire you to create a more human reality in harmony with planet Earth. Discover more at www.efectocolibri.com. We only have one life. And deciding very consciously to dedicate your life to one purpose speaks of clarity, passion, and perseverance. Not to say love. Claudia Pedra, you are the managing partner at Stone Soup Consulting, a socially driven international consultancy that works to strengthen organizations that are seeking to increase their social impact. You have worked in over 120 projects as a strategic consultant for social innovation in Europe, Latin America, Asia, and Africa, in areas such as children at risk, vulnerable populations, migrants, or the elderly. Claudia, welcome to Project Co. It is a pleasure to have you on board today.
Thank you for having me.
I think we met, it was 2019 or no, the first time.
Many years already. Yes.
I was fortunate to be one of the consultants of Stone Soup at that time.
Yes. 4 years ago. I remember it well.
So I would like to start by understanding, because you, of course, you are one of the founding partners of Stone Soup. And before we go into talking about Stone Soup in more detail, which is one of the organizations that I really admire, not only for the trajectory, but also because of the values that you represent. I was wondering, what has brought you here? What is the emotion, the mission, purpose, or motivation that has brought you here?
I think there's, of course, always many different things, but from a very early age, I got very, very upset with exclusion. Everything, when I would see people excluding people for different characteristics, it would upset me kind of deeply, profoundly. And I would never really understand. For me, people were people, and I wanted to be connected to different types of people, so I couldn't understand that exclusion part. And so from a very early age, I was really concerned with that. And when I was 14, I started reading more and more about that, about human rights, and about also interconnections with environmental issues and everything. So I started doing volunteer work for Amnesty International and Greenpeace at the time. I really wanted to kind of do things that would create positive impact. And it was very appalling for me to understand that people were being discriminated because they wrote a poem or they were union workers, or it was really something that I couldn't understand. So I started doing all of that human rights work. And of course, I was only 14. So I gave my support as I could, very young age. So I did lots of admin stuff. I went to the post office and things like that. But then later on, I helped also with translations and everything. And really from that age, I started really following what different organizations were doing in society to improve social and environmental issues. And also cultural issues came also later on. And for me, it was really important to be part of that movement and to contribute as best as I could. And I would do lots of volunteer work. So then I would do translations, and I would help to do facilitation of local groups and community work. So I really wanted to kind of make a difference. And of course, I progressed inside these organizations. In Amnesty, I went to the board, and later on I was CEO, the first CEO in Portugal. And for me, it was such a learning experience, a huge learning curve. But before I was CEO of Amnesty, I went also through the UN system. I worked in the UN HCR, with refugees, and I worked later on with IOM, the International Organization for Migration. That was still not inside the UN. It was a bit external, but now it is. And I started to kind of focus a bit more on migrations in human rights and how people are excluded in migration flows. And this was really interesting for me. But I also became very aware, not only in the organizations that I worked, but all the other organizations that I would interact with or partner with, that they were missing kind of some key elements to be sustainable, efficient, effective. And they were working a lot, but not always the best way. So that was, I worked a lot internally myself in the organizations that I was in to try to create more efficiency and to try to make, the work worthwhile and to see higher impacts on the different beneficiaries. But, later on when I left Amnesty in 2008 and I was reflecting on what I could do next, it was very clear to me that consultancy could be a good path for organizational development, that I can bring good practices, trends, traditions to organizations, that I could really make them develop in a different way. And so that's where Stone Soup's idea emerged, because we started speaking different people together about this concept of how to generate higher impact, and how to really help them with our knowledge, with our advice, but always in a co-creation mode. We can really make them bring together the best that they have together with our knowledge and really create a higher impact on society. So that's a bit how the whole idea originated, was to really bring all of that background that I had in terms of human rights and working with international organizations. And how can I use that in consultancy, a very co-creative, very facilitation style consultancy that will bring the best out of people instead of trying to teach them as a Delphi oracle. How can I bring that to different communities all over the world and take that expertise that a whole community inside Stone Soup could bring? So that was the background of how Stone Soup was created. And of course I found like-minded people, the founders that with me, and we still have two with me, Sophie Robin and Rosa Mach are still with me today. The other two founders left, but they're still in the community. And of course, we were all sharing the same principles and values to really be able to bring about change, organizational change, development that will create higher impact. And so that's how my background ties in, because I do consider that although we're a strategic consultancy company, we still work on human rights. We still work on diversity and inclusion. We still work on ethics. So everything that really motivated me since the beginning is still there.
Yeah, which is like that's the motivation. That's the thing that makes you wake up every day, no?
Yes, and I'm an eternal optimist. People ask me quite a lot why I'm an optimist, because I've seen maybe the most horrible human rights violations that you could see in the world. I've seen the worst that men could do, but I'm an eternal optimist because I've also seen the best. Every day you see people working with the resources they have, which could be almost nothing, but they have the goodwill, they have the knowledge, they have the skills, and they just try to change their communities a solution at a time. And so, of course, the world doesn't change in the rhythm that we would like, because all of us would like to have a magic wand and in 3 days everything would be solved, or in one second even better. But that doesn't happen. So we have to go there slowly. We have to change mentalities. We have to raise awareness. We have to make people understand human rights and diversity. We have to bring skills to people to help them and resources. But I'm an optimist because I see people doing wonderful things, communities being changed by these champions that are there all over the place. And so that brings me hope and optimism, because I know there's horrible things going on, but there's also best practices and wonderful solutions being designed every day. And so I hope the world will progress in the right way, And that gives me the motivation every day to continue. Everyone has tough days. Everyone has situations in which we feel, why are we doing this? Does this really have an impact? But then I traveled to Guinea Bissau, into this very isolated community. It took me 4 hours by speedboat and 12 kilometers hiking to go there. And when I arrived there, they were explaining to me that they understood this method, this project, and that's why they had this very important tool for them not to be starving. And the people that helped them understand the method was Stone Soup Consultants. We simplified the method to be understood by anyone in any part of the country. So then you kind of witness your impact. You see how your work was transformative. You see the impact that was created in that community. So now people aren't starving because you simplified something that could make them understand it very easily in communities that have no literacy. And so that really makes you happy. And that's how you see the impact of your work and how you see positive things happening despite still having terrible problems going on in the world.
Wow. Many things have come to my mind while you were speaking, because I was imagining kind of a colorful puzzle, no? In the sense that I'm thinking of a colorful puzzle when I think of the system, no? First, you started talking about exclusion. I mean, there are so many pieces which are excluded in one puzzle, no? And then you started talking about how this exclusion is the motivation that you created collectives, which is a collective of strategic consultants, no? Which are very colorful in themselves, which have different, expertises, no? And areas in which they can support throughout the world, because you're basically supporting different organizations that create positive impact throughout the world. And then you talked about simplification, no? Because at the end, being a consultant is also helping improve systems. So I see systems all over your story.
I think you see the systems because they are there. Systemic change should be our focus.
And what have you learned? Because right now, how old is Stone Soup?
Stone Soup is 15 years old. We've worked on over 350 projects in 61 countries. And we've worked on environmental and social and cultural positive impact. And to tell you what I learned, everything. It just in the sense that I feel that the learning curve in consultancy is huge. And for me, I was involved in almost 150 projects. So of the 150 projects, I learned so much about things that I didn't know before. And the most important thing of all, I learned how to do intersections. So every time that I work on a new project, I can understand how, human rights intersects with climate change, or how migration intersects advocacy, or how you work on cultural integration of people with disability, or how you can use the same methodologies for people that are discriminated because they're old. So I find the learning curve huge because in the type of consultancy that we do, like you were explaining, Anna, we have to be totally connected to the organization. That means that we're not going to design some kind of standardized process that works for all. That's completely against the way we work. We do customized approaches. And to do the customized approaches, the only way to do it is to have a mix of thematic and technical knowledge. So you can know about, of course, evaluation and strategic planning and communication and fundraising and partnerships and all of that. But you also have to understand about poverty alleviation, international cooperation, people with disability, environmental challenges, biodiversity. You have to understand about it. Otherwise, the solution that you're going to present is not adequate at all for that organization or that entrepreneur. And that means having, of course, complementary teams that have that thematic and technical skills and that understand the context and the culture of the organizations and entrepreneurs that they're serving. Because that's another thing that you cannot design a fit-all system also regarding, cultures and systems and geographies will have different kinds of challenges that people will have to do. You know, in Indonesia, they have boards that have to be in perpetuity. So imagining dealing with governance issues when you have a person that stays in perpetuity. It's quite different from having someone that stays 2 years. So you can't design the same solution for a governance project. And so it's really important that people learn about the organizations that really, really do an active listening. I know that many people say that they do active listening, but many consultants don't do it. They're just focusing on the deliverables. They're thinking about the report that they have to write instead of thinking, oh no, the best way to support this organization is X. Maybe I'll change the process that I designed first because now that I've listened and now that I've done the assessment, I have a different way of implementing this. So you do have to take the time. It takes lots of time to do this customized approach, but it's much more strategic and much more systemic for change because you want the organizations and entrepreneurs to learn with you. You want them to reflect with you. If you do it yourselves, nobody will really learn from the experience. At the end, you just have some empty documents that nobody reads and nobody really understands. So it's quite a co-creation process that needs time and investment of different people. And another important thing for us was at the beginning, not because we wanted it, but it seems like everyone that was showing up in Stone Soup was between 35 and 45 and were European. And this really upsetted us. We were like, why all of these Europeans coming with the same kind of typical characteristics, and why are not younger or older people coming in, or what's happening? So we made it more obvious in our recruitment process. And I think we were very successful in that because now we have a community of over 70 consultants, and they're based from Latin America to Europe, Africa, and Asia. And they're between 25 and 65. So we managed to bring in that. And it's been such a wonderful thing because we normally tell organizations about the benefits of diversity and inclusion. And now we can see it inside Stone Soup also, because a person that comes with this fresh perspective when they're 25 to balance it with a person that's 50 and has lots of experience, it just makes a better process for everyone and for the organizations involved. So we've been walking the talk. So we do tell people, look, you should integrate diversity and inclusion. Of course, not only diversity, because then you have to treat people well. But at the same time, you can see all of these benefits, and we're using them also in Stone Soup. So I feel very happy that we've been able to have this very diverse community.
And congratulations, no, because it's not so easy. And that brings me actually to the reflection of generally when we talk about social enterprises, no, and the whole impact ecosystem. But it starts in the West, no, generally in a privileged position. Of course, there are differences, because now I'm thinking of Mexico, and the ecosystem in Mexico is much more developed than the one in Spain, for instance. But that's another parenthesis.
Yeah, or Brazil is very developed
too. So I was thinking, do you see that there is an interest for the impact ecosystem, social entrepreneurship, social innovation, and social impact in general, spreading throughout the world? How have the trends been evolving from your experience?
I think so. I've been seeing it in Africa and Asia quite a lot. We've been involved in working with impact investors in Africa and in Asia. I've seen it in international gatherings, also conferences and places where impact investors meet. So you can see their interest, and their transition from funding to venture philanthropy to impact investment. You can see all of that, or sometimes they have the multiple programs. I was just recently in South Africa to see also how the impact ecosystem is working in Africa. So there were lots of impact investors there, and they were speaking about ESG and impact investing. So I could see it developing quite a lot. You see the European Venture Philanthropy Association, which has so many people that work on impact investment. Now they also have similar chapters in Asia and in Africa. So I do see it developing quite a lot. We've worked with a very interesting client that is Alliance Publishing. And Alliance is an NGO specialized on working on philanthropy. And it was really interesting to see they have groups in different places of the world that inform them about trends. So they have people in Latin America and also in Russia and not only, Central Europe, and they have people in Asia and Africa. And so you see it spreading all over the world. It does have different characteristics and done in different ways. For instance, in Africa, it's very associated to grassroots movements, to climate justice, to social justice. So it's focusing on things that are really in emergency mode and that grassroots communities are working on. In other places, the investment is in more structured systems and more structured organizations. But I see it developing all over the world. It's still very heavy on Central and Northern Europe, and the US are still very heavy on venture philanthropy and impact investment. But I see it spreading, and you see more and more funds showing up, impact funds based in the Mauritius or things like that. So you could see it developing. So I would say yes.
Well, Claudia, and going back to what you were saying about you being positive, which is something that I also share, what would you tell to somebody who's realistic or somebody who's negative?
I think there's a result for these people to be very negative normally is because they're exposed only to the negativity. The truth is, if you go to the mainstream media, and if you don't have a very knowledgeable field work on the social, environmental, and culture sector, maybe you only see the worst things. So you look at, situations like poverty or homelessness, and it's going up and up and up. Germany has more than 1 million people that are homeless. These are very, very serious problems, and people see them going up and up. Here in Portugal, where I live, homeless people have gone up in the last 4 years, 78%. So of course people are concerned with all of these problems, and they become very negative about the future of humanity and about everything. But then when you look at the solutions and you have access to the solutions and you have access to organizations that on the day-to-day are interested in improving their ecosystems, then you become more positive. So I would say to the negative people and to the people that feel that they're more realistic than optimistic, you have to see the good solutions and good results and good impacts that are generated by these solutions. So expose yourself to positive news. Go out of the mainstream media and look and speak to people that can inform you about what's happening all over the world. And even in the most wicked problems that you have, and we know that it will take many, many years to get better, in all of them you'll find good solutions. I think I never saw one of the wicked problems that had no good solution to them. All of them have them, but they need to be more systemic. I do feel that we have to invest a bit more in systemic change. And it's a tough investment because what we're saying to people that will have the resources to invest in it is invest in something that will show you the true impact in 20 to 30 years. And so it's a very tall ask to go to someone and say, look, invest in something. You won't see the results in 2 years or in 5 years. You'll see it in 20 to 30 years. And it's not easy. But the thing is, when you work on systems change and you work in a systemic way, you will have much higher impact because you'll see changes. And things like mentalities of people have to always be worked like this because you will never change the mentality of a person in 1 year or a group of people. You need 20 years to see differences. And if you look at, for instance, going back to the human rights issue, you see that some countries are more progressive than others on this issue. Not that they don't have problems. Once again, all of them have it, but they're more progressive. And if you look at why, it's because they do human rights education from preschool to university. So they create generations and generations of people that understand about human rights, that become fathers and mothers, and then they also give that information to their children. So the way that they are creating awareness and change and knowledge is systemic, but it took them 20 to 30 years of doing that to see the changes. The same thing, everyone speaks about, the Finland system of education. But they stopped 10 years just to reflect on how to improve it before they improved it. So it takes time to do these very systemic changes. But if we do invest in that, so we could still have the small projects, we could still have the small scale solutions, which are very good and they're helping their communities. But we also have to have someone working on the systemic change. Otherwise, we will find the same problems coming up and up. After 10 years, after 20 years, we'll find the same problem.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of the 15 years that you have been working in Stone Soup, because at the end, everything is about persevering and being humble, looking yourself into the mirror, learning what you just said. No, what have you learned? You said everything. So it's this continuous curve of saying, okay, if we want to have systemic change, then we need to be patient, and humble. And, I see it also in Efecto Colibri. I mean, we started with a little email and then we created a blog, and who read the blog? I mean, we were like a couple of, crazy friends, no? And nowadays we are a community of, hummingbirds and colibris who really believe in that change is possible. So, at the end, I think this little by little is,
step at a time.
Yes, exactly,
you go there.
Exactly. Yeah. Claudia, if you could pick like one project that you would say, wow, proud, very proud.
Oh my God. I have a few favorites. I shouldn't say that, but I do. I think this one that I was giving the example from Guinea Bissau is one that I'm proud, but I'll explain why. So we were hired by a development cooperation organization that is working in Guinea Bissau to do something that is unusual. They decided to have a continuous learning process in their project. And they wanted to have external consultants that could do systemic observation and implement change. So since the beginning, they hired us to kind of observe and to look at what they were doing, how they were implementing a method of local development that they had created. So it was very interesting local development method. It was designed by people that know what they're doing. And it even had the team that is almost the full team from Guinea Bissau. So it's not that it's, expats, which is a phrase that I hate because it's like the special immigrants, but it's not the immigrants or people from external places that are deciding the project. It was designed by Guineans. So, it was really interesting to go there. And when I went there and I observed the project the first time, it was very confusing for me because it was designed by Guineans and by experts on local development, but it was very complex. So complex that it was difficult to follow even with a very literate person. And in Guinea-Bissau, you have a huge amount of illiterate people. You also have severe challenges. So they have very unstable governments. There was coup d'etats very frequently there. You have generations of people that almost don't go to school because there are strikes. And so it's a very difficult context. And also people speak regularly over 30 languages and they learn how to write in Portuguese, but they don't speak Portuguese. So they speak Creole and one of the other 30 languages that they speak. So it's a very difficult context. It's very challenging, full of things. And we went there to observe and, our role at the beginning was to do the recommendations, and our first recommendations was to simplify. You have to do something much easier for people to understand. Because in the first presentation that they were doing to communities, they would spend an hour and a half showing a PowerPoint, explaining the whole method from A to Z, and all of the whole process that they would have to do in that first session. And so it was very overwhelming. And I'm very proud of it because we've been working with them for almost 3 years. And now there are roughly 500 projects in Guinea-Bissau in local communities funded by this method, because the method teaches communities to design their own solutions. So instead of looking, how development cooperation is, people come and go there and deliver solutions even without asking people if they want it. In this method, people have to first identify the main issues, the main problems they have in their communities, and they have to design the solutions. And then they have to do an application process, get funding, and implement the project and manage it well in a transparent way. And this, for people that are almost illiterate, is very tall, difficult task. But the method was simplified in a way that it was able to be implemented. And now you have 500 communities that have water, gardens for food, that have implemented education projects. So they decided. And it even had outcomes that were not expected. So, for instance, the method makes them divide into 3 groups: youth, men, and women. And they first discuss the problems, then they discuss the solutions. So when we were speaking to the communities, these very macho communities led by men, and men would tell us, the chiefs of the Tabanka, which is the local community, would tell us, look what I realized. Men would always design solutions good for them. Youth would design solutions good for them. Women would design solutions that are good for the whole community. So normally we choose the women's solution. So you even got gender perspective here and less discrimination of women. And now women have a more active role in the society also because of this. So I'm quite proud of the work that we did, because as consultants, sometimes we tend to complexify things instead of simplifying. So it was a challenge. We simplified it. And now 500 communities have food security. They have water. They have better education because of the work of simplification that we did. So I'm quite proud of that.
Wow. No, incredible. No? And so you're basically also changing narratives, no? Via the solutions that you design, or you change the narrative before designing the solution. Because at the end, if you're listening, you do the active listening process, listen to every voice. Do you then co-create the solution, for instance, also with the community?
Yes, we co-create with the community. So we never co-create alone. We don't believe in that model because we think that the only people that should be developing their own solution is the organization or the community. So we co-create with them. And sometimes it's challenging because people are so overworked and they have some less time and everything, and they would just prefer that the consultant would come in and deliver a solution. But we don't believe that's sustainable, so we do co-create the solutions with them, and we make them reflect on the implications of the solution, and also to be accountable for it and to have ownership for it.
Sí, super. And of course, then they are the ones rolling out the solution, no? That's the way that it becomes.
Yes, because we don't do the operational issues. We can support and give advice, but we don't do operations for many reasons. And one of them is also we don't want to substitute the staff of an organization. They should be the ones implementing the solutions. We can give them advice if they, have any challenge that comes up, but we shouldn't be the ones implementing. We shouldn't be outsourcing what should be done inside. And the truth is, if they have the capacity to do it and the skills and the resources, why should they externalize that? They're always going to be the best to explain the passion for their mission anyway.
Totally.
So going back to what you were saying also about, do you design the process? Sometimes what we do is we use the fact that we're external consultants to change their internal processes. So we say, look, we have to do an organizational assessment. They say, okay, so speak to the president and director. And you're like, no, you speak to everyone, even to the woman that's answering the phone. We'll speak to everyone. And they're like, why are you going to? Yeah, we speak to everyone. And I'll tell you more. Her opinion is as important as yours. And it's very disruptive. They get very upset. And they don't want you to include their opinions or include the opinion of non-leadership. And they even use sometimes, especially in Southern Europe, where we're very formal in some relationship, either with older people or directors of organizations. So they even use, titles like doctor this and engineer this and they try to create this distance. Through our process, we disrupt that just as simple things like calling them by their name. So they introduce them to us and say, Doctor, here. And we're like, okay, Jose. So, and they get very upset with that. And they're like, you can see their mind working. Like, did she just call me by my name? That's very weird. But then at the same time, they don't have any kind of hierarchy on us. We also have titles. And at the end, they just give up and they start treating us by their name. We treat them by their name. And all of that formalism that was creating a barrier just goes down. So, that's how we use our own processes to create some disruption into bad practices in organizations.
Yes, you're going from the drama triangle, no, in which the power structures is still like going into the way that we relate also in the movies, no, with the character of the victim, the persecutor, and the savior, and then you go into the creative dynamic, no. So the victim ceases being the victim and becomes the creator of their own reality. So basically, it's like what is coming to me, what I'm understanding is that you're changing the dynamic from codependent relationships, which is basically the typical structure that has been given to us, in which we have roles which are like cast, into interdependent relationships, no?
Yes, completely. And that you value each person in its uniqueness, because that uniqueness is what gives you all of the benefits for the organization. So people have different educations and different backgrounds and different perspectives, and that's the best. Why should you be with someone in an organization that just agrees with you every day? It doesn't make any sense. And the fact that the person didn't have the opportunity to go to school it doesn't make that person less worthy. And so people have to understand about that. I just came back from 2 days of a workshop on human rights in which I was trying to speak with people that do social support and intervention about human rights, and for them to understand that they also have prejudice and stereotypes. They have to address them, and they have to overcome them, and they have to also address the stereotypes and prejudice of everyone in the society that is fighting against the work that they're doing. But if we don't look at this from a human rights perspective, it's just people doing processes. Like, okay, a migrant comes in. What do you need? Documents. No. You need to be listened to. You're a person. You're not a migrant. You're also a migrant. But you're not only a migrant. You're still a person that went through a process that is different from every single person. And I think we tend in our interventions to think about collectives too much and less about the individuals in those collectives.
The humanity. I love it. I don't know if does something else come to your mind that you would like to share with our audience?
I think the important thing is that we are coherent in our lives. You know, it's not that you all have to be human rights activists or you all have to be consultants. It's more about being coherent in your lives, because what I see, when I speak about human rights, for instance, I always say the problem in the world is not the bad people. It's the good people that do nothing. So it's not so much that you have to be on the street protesting every day, but do you pay your cleaning worker? And do you give her or him social security? You know, these kind of incoherent things, like people are protesting on the street. I want climate change. I want human rights. And then you go in, you see that their cleaning worker doesn't have social security and will have no pension because people are incoherent. So you don't have to change the world in 5 days, but you can be coherent about your actions. And regardless of the profession that you're in or whatever you do or the place that you are in the world, you can still be a coherent and ethical and respectful of human rights.
Thank you so much for joining Project Code, dear Claudia. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And it was a pleasure. Really nice questions. Thank you, Anna. And I hope your listeners will enjoy the podcast.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. You can find all the references of the episode on our website, www.efectocolibri.com/proyectoco. If you liked it, rate us with 5 stars, leave us a comment, and share it with your network. This will help us reach more people and make social innovation become the norm. So in advance, a big thank you. If you have questions, feedback, or want to introduce us to a guest for the podcast, you can write us directly at ana@efectocolibri.com. See you next time.